Just this once. The three most expensive words in my financial vocabulary. Every splurge was always just this once. Every group trip was a special occasion. Every trendy restaurant was a rare treat. Except they weren't. They were regular expenses I couldn't afford, justified by lies I told myself. I challenge you to open your banking app right now while watching this video. How much did you spend last month on just this once? Purchases or social obligations you couldn't afford? I'll wait, because that's your financial self-deception tax. Mine was $1,750 a month. Today I'll show you how I identified my money lies, cut this tax to zero, and still maintained my most important relationships. The expensive art of pretending. Do you ever catch yourself living a financial fantasy? I sure did. For years, I was the master of the $200 smile. You know, that practiced grin you wear when the dinner bill arrives and your stomach drops, but you casually reach for your credit card anyway? That was me, and it's a performance that cost me more than just money. Growing up, I was the kid with the piggy bank that actually had coins in it. While my friends blew their birthday money on whatever toy was trending that month, I was carefully counting my dollars, planning for bigger purchases down the road. I took pride in being good with money. It was part of my identity, something that made me feel secure and in control. Then adulthood hit me like a financial freight train. Suddenly, I wasn't just managing my lunch money or summer job earnings. I was navigating rent, utilities, student loans, and the social expectations that come with new friendships. And those new friendships? They came with people who had careers, not just jobs, professionals with salaries that doubled mine. The invitations started rolling in. Dinners at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my entire grocery budget for the week. Weekend getaways to beach houses and ski lodges, concert tickets in VIP sections. Shopping trips where everyone else was casually dropping hundreds of dollars while I was secretly calculating if I could make it to the next paycheck if I bought even one item. I still remember the first time I crossed my financial line. It was a Friday night dinner at this trendy new restaurant downtown. 8 friends sharing small plates and ordering cocktails like they were water. When the bill came, $200 for my portion, I felt that moment of panic. I couldn't afford this, not even close. But instead of being honest, I heard myself say, "I've got this round," and passed my credit card to the server. The relief on everyone's faces, the casual "thanks, we'll get the next one" comments, the seamless continuation of the evening without the awkwardness of me admitting I was broke, it felt like belonging. For the first time, I experienced what would become my financial drug of choice, social acceptance purchased on credit. That one dinner created a template for the next 3 years of my life. The temporary anxiety of swiping my card was nothing compared to the immediate reward of being part of the group. Soon that dinner turned into a weekend trip to Nashville. The trip became front-row concert tickets. The concert tickets morphed into designer jeans I definitely couldn't afford. Each purchase building on the last, creating an illusion of a life I wasn't actually earning. The real cost wasn't just financial. It was emotional. I'd lay awake at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, opening my banking app to stare at my dwindling balance, calculating which bills I could delay paying. My heart would race, my palms would sweat, and I'd promise myself I'd stop, that this weekend would be different. Then Saturday would come, and I'd be sitting at brunch, ordering mimosas and avocado toast with a smile plastered on my face, participating in conversations about upcoming trips I had already mentally committed to joining. The excuses became as automatic as breathing. I work so hard, I deserve to treat myself. It's an investment in networking. Everyone else is doing it, so it must be normal. I'll start saving next month when things calm down. It's just temporary until I get that raise. The lies I told myself were impressive in their creativity and absolutely devastating in their consequences. What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't just buying dinners and trips, I was purchasing what I thought was friendship insurance. Every time I said yes to something I couldn't afford, I was making a payment toward my greatest fear, social rejection. Somehow, I had convinced myself that if I stopped spending, my friends would stop caring. That the moment I said, "I can't afford this," they would hear, "I don't value you enough to make it work." The math should have been obvious. My friends were earning $80,000 to $100,000 a year in their corporate jobs and tech positions. I was making $42,000 as a marketing assistant at a nonprofit. They were spending 15% of their income on social activities. I was spending 40% of mine. They could afford to save for retirement and take those weekend trips. I was putting both on credit cards with 22% interest rates. But I wasn't doing math during those years. I was performing emotional calculus. In my equation, the cost of potential rejection outweighed the benefit of financial stability every single time. So I kept spending, kept pretending, kept watching my debt climb while my bank account emptied. The worst part? The whole situation was built on a false premise. I assumed everyone else was comfortably affording our lifestyle because they never indicated otherwise. They ordered without checking prices, split bills evenly without hesitation, and bought round after round without wincing. What I didn't consider was that some of them might be putting on the exact same performance I was, smiling through financial pain because they too were afraid to be the one who said, "Actually, I can't afford this." I was confusing friendship with financial compatibility. True connection isn't built on shared spending habits. It's built on mutual respect, understanding, and authenticity. But I was too scared to test that theory. What if I was wrong? What if these friendships really were conditional on my ability to keep up financially? The possibility was too terrifying to confront. So instead, I lived in financial pretend land, where my income magically stretched to accommodate whatever social opportunity came my way. I smiled and swiped and suffered in silence, watching my credit card balances grow while my savings account remained empty. You know what's crazy? I convinced myself that this was normal, adult financial behavior, that everyone carried this kind of debt, that everyone felt this low-level anxiety about money all the time. I normalized my own financial destruction because it was easier than admitting I had a problem, especially a problem that might impact my social standing. The real kicker was how good I got at compartmentalizing. During the week, I was budget conscious, packing lunches, making coffee at home, taking the bus instead of Ubers. I'd save $3 here, $5 there, feeling accomplished about my frugality. Then the weekend would arrive, and I'd blow $300 in a single night without blinking, effectively erasing any progress I'd made. It was like living two financial lives. Weekday me was responsible, careful, and stressed about money. Weekend me was carefree, generous, and seemingly affluent. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but I maintained the split personality because it allowed me to feel both financially virtuous and socially accepted, depending on which day of the week it was. The breaking point didn't come as dramatically as you might expect. There was no single catastrophic purchase that finally made me face reality. Instead, it was the slow, crushing weight of accumulated debt that finally made it impossible to keep pretending. The moment of clarity came not with a bang, but with a whimper. Just me, alone in my apartment, finally facing the numbers I'd been avoiding for years. The childhood money lessons that set me up to fail. While I was sitting alone in my apartment with my financial reality, a haunting question kept circling my mind. Why was I so terrified of financial honesty? The answer wasn't in my bank statements or credit card bills. It was buried in my childhood, where I'd learned the first and most powerful money lie of all, that financial struggles must remain our family's darkest secret. Growing up, you would never have guessed my family had money problems. From the outside, we looked like everyone else on our street. Modest but nice home, 2 reliable cars in the driveway, and the annual summer trip to visit relatives. We weren't flashy, but we were normal, and that normality was something my parents guarded fiercely. What I didn't know until much later was that behind our closed doors, my parents were locked in a silent war with debt. Credit card statements arrived in plain envelopes that would disappear into my dad's desk drawer before anyone else could see them. My parents had perfected the art of the hushed, tense conversation that would abruptly transform into casual chatter the moment I walked into the room. I'll never forget the day I came home excitedly waving a birthday party invitation from the most popular girl in my class. It included a trip to an expensive indoor water park with lunch and a personalized gift bag. My mom's face did this complicated dance between wanting me to be happy and pure panic. Later that evening, she sat me down and delivered the line that would become my unspoken money mantra. Don't tell anyone we can't afford it. Just say we're busy that weekend. It was my first lesson in financial shame. Money problems weren't just practical challenges, they were secrets to be hidden at all costs. By middle school, I'd internalized this lesson so thoroughly that I developed my own strategies for hiding our financial reality. When friends wanted to go to the mall food court and I didn't have money, I'd say I wasn't hungry or that I'd just eaten. I became an expert at suggesting free alternatives to paid activities, always with a casual excuse that never mentioned money. But here's what's fascinating about childhood money lessons. They don't arrive in formal lectures. According to research from the Spark Institute, children absorb money attitudes not just from what parents say, but primarily from what they do. While my parents never explicitly said money problems are shameful, their behavior taught me that financial struggles should be concealed behind a facade of normalcy. Every time my mom answered the phone with a cheerful voice, despite having just been crying over bills, every time my dad told neighbors about our wonderful vacation when we'd actually just stayed home to save money, these moments were my real financial education. The problem with this education is that it left me completely unprepared for adult financial reality. Over 50% of young adults exhibit low levels of financial literacy, and many of us can trace this directly back to inadequate or distorted financial education during our formative years. I wasn't just financially illiterate. I was emotionally programmed to hide and avoid financial problems rather than address them. This created a perfect storm when I entered adulthood. I hadn't just failed to learn how to budget or save. I'd actively learned that appearing financially stable was more important than actually being financially stable. The psychological impact of financial secrecy left me with anxiety and a sense of hopelessness about money that followed me into adulthood. Remember how I'd tell friends I wasn't hungry when I couldn't afford lunch? Fast forward to my adult life, and I was doing the exact same thing, but with higher stakes. Instead of skipping a $5 lunch, I was charging a $200 dinner I couldn't afford because admitting I couldn't keep up financially felt more terrifying than the debt itself. The most insidious part? I thought I was alone in this pattern. But research shows this is remarkably common. Many of us are living out the financial scripts we were handed as children, often without realizing it. My parents had actually been trapped in their own generational cycle. My grandparents had lived through the Great Depression, where financial hardship carried real stigma. My parents inherited that shame and passed it down to me, wrapped in good intentions. They weren't trying to harm me. They were trying to protect me from social rejection and the pain they associated with financial struggle. When parents bail out their children financially during crises without explanation, they inadvertently teach them to rely on others for financial support. This creates a lack of self-sufficiency that can follow them into adulthood. I experienced this firsthand. My parents would occasionally cover expenses for me in high school and early college, but we never discussed why I was short on money or how to prevent it in the future. What would have been more valuable was if they had explained their own financial struggles to me. This might have equipped me with the skills to handle emergencies and prevent similar situations in my own life, fostering the resilience and independence I so desperately needed later. By the time I hit my 20s, I had no financial roadmap except the one that told me appearances matter most. I had no practice talking honestly about money. I had never learned that financial struggles are normal, temporary, and solvable with the right approach. Instead, I had learned that they were shameful secrets to be hidden at all costs. So when I found myself in that social circle where everyone seemed to have more money than me, my childhood training kicked in automatically. Of course I pretended. Of course I spent money I didn't have. Of course I hid the truth. I was executing the exact playbook I'd been handed, even though the game had changed completely. Breaking generational money patterns requires open discussions about finances, something experts consistently recommend, but that felt impossible given my programming. The irony is that the honest conversations about money that I feared would lead to rejection were exactly what I needed most. My financial recovery didn't just require a budget. It required unlearning core beliefs I'd absorbed before I was old enough to question them. I had to recognize that financial honesty doesn't risk rejection. Financial pretending guarantees eventual crisis. Financial literacy programs for youth are becoming increasingly important precisely because they can interrupt these generational patterns. Children who learn about money management early tend to develop better financial habits and achieve more stability in adulthood. I often wonder how different my life might have been if I'd had access to that kind of education. If someone had countered my parents' unintentional lessons with more helpful ones. Looking back, I can see that my financial struggles as an adult weren't just about poor budgeting or impulsive spending. They were the predictable outcome of lessons I'd absorbed while sitting at our kitchen table, watching my parents craft careful illusions of financial normalcy that protected our status but sacrificed their peace, and eventually mine. The lies I told myself and why they worked so well. Those childhood lessons about financial secrecy evolved into something far more dangerous as I grew up. A sophisticated system of lies I told myself every time I spent money I didn't have. What makes financial self-deception so powerful isn't that we're dishonest with ourselves. It's that we actually believe our own fiction, even as our bank accounts tell a completely different story. When I look back at how I justified my spending, it's almost impressive. Each time I reached for my credit card, a little voice in my head would craft the perfect explanation why this purchase was different from all the others, why this one was justified, necessary, or even smart. These weren't random thoughts popping into my head. They were elaborate defense mechanisms that targeted my deepest insecurities and desires with surgical precision. The most dangerous part? These justifications sounded completely reasonable in the moment. That's how self-deception works. It contains just enough truth to be believable, while conveniently hiding the parts that would force me to confront reality. Let me break down my greatest hits of financial fiction. Line 1. This is an investment in my network. This was my personal favorite. Every time I spent $75 on cocktails or $150 on dinner with colleagues or friends in higher positions, I wasn't just socializing. I was investing in my professional network. It sounded so responsible, so strategic. In my mind, these weren't expenses but investments that would eventually pay dividends through job opportunities or promotions. The truth? While relationships matter, I was using networking as a blanket justification for social spending I couldn't afford. Lie number 2, I'll definitely make more money soon. This lie was particularly seductive because it played on my optimism about the future. I'd tell myself that my current spending was just temporarily out of alignment with my income because that big raise, promotion, or side hustle success was just around the corner. I wasn't spending beyond my means. I was spending according to my future means. Psychologists call this the past success fallacy. The belief that because I'd been successful in getting jobs before, I would inevitably make more money soon. This cognitive bias had me living in a financial future that never arrived. Lie number 3. Everyone else is doing fine financially. This wasn't just an assumption, it was a cornerstone of my financial self-deception. Since no one in my friend group ever talked about money struggles, I convinced myself they were all comfortably affording our lifestyle. When they suggested expensive restaurants or weekend getaways without hesitation, I interpreted their silence about costs as financial ease, rather than recognizing they might be struggling just like me. This created a dangerous feedback loop. I spent to match what I perceived as their normal spending, and they likely did the same in response to me. Lie number 4. Missing out costs more than money. This was my emotional trump card. Whenever an invitation arrived that I knew I couldn't afford, I'd immediately calculate 2 costs. The financial cost of saying yes versus the emotional cost of saying no. And somehow, in my distorted calculations, the pain of missing out always outweighed the financial damage. I convinced myself that skipping these experiences would damage my relationships, career prospects, and happiness in ways more significant than mere money problems. These weren't just casual excuses. They formed a comprehensive system of self-deception that protected my self-image while simultaneously destroying my financial health. I was actively engaging in confirmation bias, seeking information that supported my spending decisions while ignoring the mounting evidence that I was in serious trouble. My bank statements told one story, but I chose to believe the narrative that made me feel better about myself. The particularly insidious aspect of financial self-deception is how it creates a false sense of competence. I genuinely believed I understood my financial situation and was making reasonable choices. When friends commented on my generosity or seeming financial ease, it reinforced my delusional belief that I was handling things well. This overconfidence led me to make increasingly risky decisions, convinced I knew better than the numbers in my account. One of my most effective lies was, "I'll start seriously saving next month." This procrastination technique bought me time while giving me the comforting illusion that I was being responsible, just not quite yet. I had legitimate-sounding reasons why this month was exceptional. Someone's birthday, a one-time networking event, a limited-time sale on something I needed. Next month would always be the perfect time to get serious about my finances. Spoiler alert, next month never came. The cognitive dissonance was real. Part of me knew I was in financial trouble, but acknowledging that reality would have forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. Was I as successful as I portrayed myself to be? Was I as smart with money as I claimed? Rather than face these questions, I altered my perception of reality to align with how I wanted to see myself: financially savvy, generous, and successful. What made these lies so effective was that they each contained just enough truth to be believable. Networking is important. Future income growth is possible. Social connections do matter. These kernels of truth made my excuses seem reasonable rather than what they actually were. Sophisticated rationalizations for behavior I knew was problematic. The most puzzling part of financial self-deception is that it happens even when we're alone with our thoughts. There was no audience when I justified a purchase to myself at 11 p.m. while shopping online. The person I was working hardest to convince was me. I wasn't consciously lying. I thoroughly believed each justification in the moment I made it. That's what makes self-deception so much more powerful than simply lying to others. When I finally began to recognize these patterns, I realized something important. These weren't random thoughts, but carefully constructed defenses designed to protect my self-image. Each lie targeted a specific fear: fear of missing out, fear of professional stagnation, fear of social rejection. By identifying the fears behind the lies, I could finally begin to address the real issues driving my spending. The hardest truth to face wasn't the state of my finances. It was acknowledging how much energy I'd invested in deceiving myself. I'd become so skilled at rationalization that I could justify virtually any purchase, no matter how unnecessary or unaffordable. My financial self-deception wasn't a side effect of my spending habits. It was the engine driving them forward. The breaking point: when the numbers don't add up. My elaborate system of financial justifications worked perfectly, until it didn't. When 59% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, it's easy to believe you're just part of a normal struggle. But what happens when you're suddenly facing eviction while texting about Miami vacation plans? That's exactly where I found myself. The math had finally caught up with all my creative accounting. The reckoning didn't arrive with dramatic flair. No debt collectors pounding at my door or cars being repossessed in the dead of night. Instead, it happened on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m., a calculator app glowing on my phone screen as I finally forced myself to add everything up. I'd been avoiding this moment for months. Every time I'd start tallying figures, anxiety would wash over me, and I'd quickly close the banking app, promising to deal with it tomorrow. But that night was different. Something inside me broke. Or maybe it was finally healing, and I couldn't look away anymore. The numbers told a stark story. $27,000 spread across 3 maxed-out credit cards, $8,000 in personal loans I'd taken to cover previous credit card payments, and a checking account balance of just $342. My financial house of cards wasn't just wobbling, it had collapsed entirely. What shocked me most wasn't the total amount, though seeing $35,000 glowing on my calculator screen did make my stomach lurch. It was realizing that 70% of my take-home pay was going straight to minimum debt payments, not building equity in a home or paying off student loans that had given me valuable education, just servicing consumer debt that had bought me nothing but the temporary illusion of keeping up. The average sustainable debt-to-income ratio is around 43%, according to financial experts. I was well beyond that threshold, operating in a financial danger zone where math simply doesn't work anymore. The remaining 30% of my income barely covered rent, utilities, and the most basic groceries. Savings? Retirement? Emergency fund? These concepts existed in a parallel universe I couldn't access. As I sat there on those cold bathroom tiles, I calculated another disturbing figure, the gap between my actual income and my lifestyle. I was living as if I earned $85,000 annually, while actually making just $48,000. That $37,000 difference was coming straight from high-interest debt that compounded my problems monthly. The next morning, still reeling from my financial revelation, my phone buzzed with a group text. Miami for Jordan's birthday. 4 days, 3 nights, $1,200 all in. Who's coming? Without even thinking, pure muscle memory at this point, my thumbs typed, "Count me in, can't wait." As soon as I hit send, my brain kicked into overdrive calculating which bill I could skip that month to make it work. Electric bill? They wouldn't shut it off for at least 2 months of non-payment. Car insurance? Could probably go a month without it if I drove carefully. Rent? Well, I was already 2 weeks late, but surely my landlord would understand. 3 days later, I found the eviction warning notice taped to my door. That pink paper represented the collision of my two worlds, the carefree social persona who was Miami-bound, and the financial reality of someone who couldn't afford their basic housing. I stood in my hallway holding that notice as my phone continued to buzz with excited group texts about beach outfits and club reservations. Research from the National Foundation for Credit Counseling shows that 61% of young adults between 18 to 35 report significant financial stress due to rising living costs and housing expenses. I was definitely part of that statistic, but unlike many others, my stress wasn't just from external economic factors, it was self-inflicted. The psychological toll was becoming unbearable. Studies show that ignoring financial problems, like avoiding debt collectors or eviction notices, creates a cycle of heightened anxiety and stress. I was living this research finding in real time, experiencing the shame and embarrassment that researchers identify as common emotional responses to financial distress. That eviction notice forced me to acknowledge something profound. I was about to be homeless while simultaneously planning a luxury weekend getaway. The cognitive dissonance was so severe, it felt like my brain might split in two. How had I maintained these contradictory realities for so long? I canceled my Miami plans with a vague excuse about a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. My financial family was certainly in emergency status. Instead of spending that weekend at South Beach, I spent it creating spreadsheets of every debt, every minimum payment, every interest rate, and every deadline. No more financial fiction, just cold, hard numbers. The calculations were grim. Even if I put every spare dollar toward debt payment and stopped all social spending completely, it would take over 3 years to climb out of this hole. That timeline assumed nothing went wrong, no medical emergencies, car repairs, or other unexpected expenses. And we all know life doesn't work that way. What made it worse was realizing how many warning signs I'd ignored. When my first credit card hit its limit, I should have stopped and reassessed. Instead, I applied for a second card. When that maxed out, I got a third. When minimum payments became difficult, I took out personal loans at slightly lower interest rates to cover the credit card payments, effectively reshuffling debt rather than addressing it. I had created my own personal debt spiral, and like quicksand, every move I made only pulled me deeper. That night on my bathroom floor marked a fundamental shift in how I viewed money. For the first time, I stopped seeing finances as a narrative I could creatively rewrite and started seeing them as a mathematical reality that existed whether I acknowledged it or not. The numbers didn't care about my social anxiety or fear of missing out. They simply didn't add up, and no amount of creative accounting could change that. Living paycheck to paycheck, like 59% of Americans, had become my norm. But I'd gone beyond that into living beyond my paychecks entirely, drawing from a well of credit that was now bone dry. The psychological cycle of financial anxiety had become my daily reality, feeling trapped, hopeless, and completely out of control of my financial situation. What I realized in that moment of clarity was that financial self-deception isn't just about lying to yourself about numbers. It's about something deeper, a a fundamental disconnect between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. My financial breaking point forced me to recognize that I had been living someone else's life at a price I couldn't afford. Both had dragged my friends into a financial fantasy world without their consent. Now I faced the terrifying prospect of shattering that illusion with a single text message that would reveal the broke, anxious person behind my carefully crafted facade. The morning after my bathroom floor breakdown, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. The eviction warning letter lay beside me, a stark reminder that I couldn't keep playing this game. My friends were already planning a weekend in Miami, a trip I'd pretend to afford while skipping rent payments. The cycle had to end. I picked up my phone and opened our group chat. How do you tell friends you've been financially lying to them for years? That the person who always said, "Let's get another round," was secretly drowning in debt? That you've been using one credit card to pay off another just to maintain the illusion of financial stability? My thumbs hovered over the keyboard as I drafted, deleted, and redrafted my confession. The first version was too apologetic, the second too defensive. By the 17th attempt, my hands were literally shaking as I typed. Hey everyone, I need to be honest about something. I can't afford Miami. In fact, I can't afford most of the things we do together. I've been maxing out credit cards and taking on loans to keep up with our lifestyle, and I'm now facing possible eviction. I'm not asking for money, I just can't pretend anymore. I'd still love to hang out, but I need to do things that cost little or nothing for a while. My thumb hovered over the send button for what felt like hours. This message could end friendships I'd spent years building, but continuing the charade would definitely end my financial future. I pressed send and immediately felt like throwing up. The responses came in waves, each notification making my heart skip. First was the most painful, silence. 3 friends read the message and didn't respond at all. The digital equivalent of awkwardly looking at the floor when someone says something uncomfortable. Then came variations of, "We need to talk," some sympathetic, others with a hint of judgment. Alex, who always organized our group trips, simply wrote, "Call me when you can." No emoji, no exclamation point, just cold text that could mean anything. I was sitting in stunned silence when my phone rang. It was Megan, one of my closest friends who always seemed to have her life together. She was crying. "I'm in the exact same situation," she confessed between sobs. "I owe $31,000 on credit cards. I've been taking out cash advances to pay for dinners with everyone. I thought I was the only one faking it." That unexpected moment of connection was like a lifeline thrown into my sea of shame. I wasn't alone in my financial facade, a realization both heartbreaking and comforting. According to research, 65% of people actually want more open conversations about money, but most of us are too frightened to initiate them. Not everyone was as understanding as Megan. Jamie sent a private message that cut deep. "Your money issues make me really uncomfortable. I don't want to think about financial problems when I'm trying to have fun with friends." The subtext was clear. My financial honesty was ruining the pleasant fiction we'd all been living in. 3 days after my text, Alex organized a dinner to talk things through. The old me would have panicked. A group dinner meant at least $60, probably closer to $100 with the inevitable split bill. But I was done pretending. I agreed to come, but warned I'd only be ordering the cheapest menu item. Walking into that restaurant felt like entering a job interview I was destined to fail. 6 friends sat around the table, some looking sympathetic, others awkward. For the first time, I openly ordered just water and the least expensive appetizer as my meal. No excuses about not being hungry or having eaten earlier. Just the simple truth. This is what I can afford today. What followed was the most honest conversation about money I'd ever had with friends. It turned out Megan wasn't the only one struggling. 2 others admitted they were also stretching their finances to maintain appearances. One friend confessed he'd been picking up extra weekend shifts just to afford our regular hangouts, but had been too embarrassed to say anything. Alex, who I'd always assumed was wealthy based on his spending habits, revealed he made significantly less than I thought, but prioritized social spending over everything else. "I live in a tiny studio apartment, so I can afford to go out," he admitted. "I just never invited anyone over because I was embarrassed. As experts suggest, framing these financial discussions around shared experiences rather than personal shortcomings created a supportive environment. Instead of feeling judged for my financial failures, I felt part of a collective awakening about the pressures we'd all been feeling. Not everyone at the table was receptive. 2 friends remained noticeably quiet, contributing little to the conversation. They were the same ones who hadn't responded to my text. Their silence spoke volumes. They weren't interested in a friendship that acknowledged financial limitations. The real revelation came when we got the check. For years, we'd automatically split bills evenly regardless of what each person ordered. This time, everyone paid for exactly what they consumed. The simple act of paying separately freed me from the anxiety that had accompanied every group meal for years. "We should have been doing this all along," said Chris, one of the friends who'd admitted his own financial struggles. "Why did we think we all had to spend the same amount to enjoy each other's company?" That question hung in the air, illuminating the absurdity of our previous behavior. We'd created an unspoken rule that friendship required financial equality, or at least the appearance of it. As we left the restaurant, the group naturally divided. Those who'd engaged in the money conversation made plans for a movie night at someone's apartment, a low-cost alternative to our usual bar hopping. The 2 silent friends made excuses about other commitments. In the weeks that followed, my social circle underwent a transformation. Financial honesty acted like a filter, revealing which connections were built on genuine friendship and which were merely held together by shared consumption. Some friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the new dynamic of budget-conscious socializing. Others stepped closer, relieved that someone had finally broken the taboo. Research suggests that open discussions about finances can lead to stronger bonds and mutual support among friends. I was living proof of this finding. The friends who stayed didn't just tolerate my financial situation, they embraced the authenticity it brought to our relationship. We started having conversations about more meaningful topics than where to go for dinner or which concert to attend. One of the most surprising outcomes was how our communication improved. Before my confession, I'd been constantly distracted during social events, mentally calculating how each drink or appetizer was adding to my debt. Now, I was fully present in conversations, not silently panicking about how I'd pay for the evening. We developed new rituals that reflected our actual financial situations rather than our aspirational ones. Potluck dinners replaced restaurant outings. Free community events became our weekend activities. These changes didn't just save money, they created more meaningful interactions. The friend audit, who stayed and who left. Those meaningful interactions were about to face their ultimate test when I decided to go completely broke. On purpose. What happens when you suddenly can't spend a single dollar on your social life for 3 months straight? My friend Audit revealed a truth about relationships that money had been hiding all along. After coming clean about my financial mess, I made a bold decision: 0 social spending for 3 months. Not a single dollar on brunches, movies, or even coffee meetups. This wasn't just about saving money, it was about discovering who my true friends were when I couldn't pick up the tab anymore. I created a simple spreadsheet titled Friend Audit, where I tracked who stayed in touch and who vanished when my wallet closed. I even made columns for suggested free activities and their response to document exactly what happened when money was removed from our friendship equation. The first week was brutal. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with plans and invites, felt eerily silent. I'd gotten so used to being the one who said yes to everything that people stopped asking when I couldn't anymore. My weekend calendar, once packed with 8 to 10 social events, suddenly looked like a blank canvas. By the second week, I started reaching out with budget-friendly alternatives. Can't do happy hour, but would you want to walk around the park instead? Or movie tickets are tight this month, but I'm hosting a potluck movie night if you're interested. The responses, or lack thereof, were eye-opening. 3 friends completely ghosted me. Not even a courtesy reply. These were people I'd spent thousands of dollars with over the years. At restaurants, concerts, weekend getaways. One was a college friend I'd known for 8 years. Another was someone I'd helped move apartments just months earlier. Their silence spoke volumes. Two others initially responded with enthusiasm but gradually faded away. They'd cancel our free hangouts last minute or be too busy to commit. When I suggested hiking instead of our usual expensive brunch, one friend texted back, "Sounds fun, but I'm not really an outdoors person." We had literally gone camping together the previous summer. What hurt most wasn't that they left, it was realizing our entire relationship had been built on a foundation of spending. Without restaurants, bars, and concerts as the backdrop, we apparently had nothing in common. But here's where the story gets interesting. 4 friends not only stuck around, they stepped up in ways I never expected. Lisa started inviting me over for home-cooked meals instead of our usual $60 dinners out. Mark suggested we explore free community events together. They adapted to my new financial reality without complaint or judgment. These weren't just fair-weather friends. They were people who genuinely valued me beyond my ability to split the bill. The most revealing conversations happened during these low-cost hangouts. When financial pretense was removed, authenticity filled the space. Research supports this. Financial honesty often leads to deeper understanding and support between friends. This certainly proved true in my case. I've been wanting to cut back on spending too, Lisa confessed during one of our homemade pizza nights. But I was afraid everyone would think I was cheap or boring. Her honesty encouraged me to be even more transparent about my journey. The biggest surprise came from 2 friends I'd always assumed were financially secure. During a free concert in the park, Jamie admitted she was $23,000 in credit card debt. "I've been living paycheck to paycheck for years," she confessed. But I was too embarrassed to say anything when everyone was planning expensive trips. Then there was Tyler, who always drove a nice car and wore designer clothes. During a hike, he revealed he was drowning in payments and considering moving back in with his parents. "I've been keeping up appearances for so long, I don't know how to stop," he said. We were all trapped in the same cycle of financial pretending, silently suffering, while maintaining the illusion of prosperity. These confessions created an entirely new dynamic in our friendship group. We formed what we jokingly called the Broke But Honest Club, meeting weekly to support each other's financial goals. We shared budgeting tips, celebrated debt payments, and held each other accountable. What began as my personal financial crisis evolved into a support system none of us knew we needed. The pattern became clear. Superficial relationships based on shared spending habits couldn't withstand financial honesty, while genuine connections actually strengthened when money was removed from the equation. According to the research, this is a common phenomenon. Relationships built on financial compatibility, rather than authentic connection, tend to falter when circumstances change. 3 months into my spending freeze, my social circle had shrunk by half, but the quality of my remaining relationships had doubled. We developed new rituals that reflected our actual financial situations: potluck dinners, game nights, free community events, hiking, and beach days. We started actually talking during these activities, rather than just consuming together. An unexpected outcome was how we began helping each other save money. Mark knew all the free museum days in the city. Jamie had mastered the art of budget prepping and taught us all her recipes. Tyler found free workout classes at the local park. We became resources for each other rather than enablers of financial destruction. The most profound lesson from my friend Audit wasn't about who left. It was about the authentic connections that formed in their absence. When I stopped spending to impress, I created space for genuine relationships based on mutual support and understanding. I discovered that real friends don't disappear when your wallet is empty. They help you find joy that doesn't cost a thing. Perhaps most importantly, I realized how many young adults were suffering in silence with financial stress and anxiety. The survey showing that 68% of teens would take financial literacy courses if offered suggests I wasn't alone in my struggle. Financial education might have prevented not just my debt crisis, but the superficial relationships built on unsustainable spending. The recovery plan, rebuilding my financial life. Financial honesty had cost me half my social circle, but my bank account was still in critical condition. Most debt advice focuses on small changes, but when you're $35,000 underwater, cutting back on lattes isn't going to cut it. I needed a complete financial demolition and rebuild that would transform both my bank balance and my relationship with money. After staring at that terrifying number, $35,000, I realized I couldn't just tweak my spending habits. I needed a comprehensive strategy that addressed both the financial disaster and the emotional patterns that created it. That's when I developed my 3-phase recovery plan: emergency stabilization, debt demolition, and relationship rebuilding. When I first calculated how long it would take to become debt-free, I nearly abandoned the whole plan. 43 months. That's over 3.5 years of financial sacrifice just to get back to zero. Not to build wealth, not to invest, just to stop drowning. The timeline felt like a prison sentence, but I reminded myself that those 43 months would pass whether I tackled my debt or not. The only question was what position I'd be in when they were over. Phase 1. Emergency stabilization was about stopping the bleeding. I made dramatic lifestyle changes that many financial advisors consider too extreme. I sold my car and switched to public transportation, which saved me $380 monthly between car payments, insurance, gas, and maintenance. I moved out of my 1-bedroom apartment into a shared house with 2 roommates, cutting my housing costs by $650. I canceled every subscription service, stopped ordering takeout, and started meal prepping. Another $170 saved. These 3 changes alone freed up $1,200 monthly that could go straight to debt. The first 3 months were brutal. I remember sitting on my new, much smaller bedroom floor, surrounded by boxes, questioning every life choice that had led me here. But that first month, when I had an extra $1,200 to put toward my highest interest credit card, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. For Phase 2, debt demolition, I implemented the debt avalanche method. While many experts recommend the snowball method, paying off smallest debts first for psychological wins, I couldn't afford the luxury of emotional victories. The avalanche approach, targeting the highest interest debts first while making minimum payments on everything else, would save me thousands in interest payments over time. But even with my new frugal lifestyle, progress felt painfully slow. That's when I realized I needed to attack from both directions. Not just spending less, but earning more. I signed up for food delivery services and dedicated every weekend to hustling. Those first few weekends of driving around, delivering other people's dinner while I ate ramen at home were humbling, but I committed to putting 100% of that side income toward debt. What I didn't expect was how quickly that additional income would accelerate my timeline. By bringing in an extra $800 to $1,000 monthly through my side hustle, I shaved 14 months off my debt-free date. Suddenly, freedom was just 29 months away instead of 43. Research backs this up. Over 41% of Gen Z and millennials report significant improvements in financial wellness through side hustles. I was living proof. The most ingenious part of my system wasn't willpower, it was automation. I set up automatic transfers that moved money to debt payments the moment my paychecks hit my account. By paying myself last instead of first, I eliminated the constant decision fatigue of choosing between responsible debt payment and immediate gratification. The system worked even on days when my motivation didn't. Phase 3, relationship rebuilding, was perhaps the most challenging and rewarding part of the process. While the first 2 phases addressed the practical aspects of my finances, this phase tackled the social and emotional components of recovery. I had to rebuild a social life that wasn't centered around spending money. I started by being completely transparent about my budget with new friends and the ones who had stuck around. "I'd love to hang out, but I have exactly $15 for social activities this week," became my standard opening line. Instead of vague excuses or reluctant participation that would blow my budget, I offered alternatives: hosting game nights, exploring free community events, or suggesting potluck dinners. What surprised me most was how many people responded positively to this honesty. It turned out that many of my new friends were also concerned about their finances, but had been afraid to speak up. My transparency gave them permission to acknowledge their own limitations. We became financial accountability partners, celebrating debt payments instead of purchases. Throughout this journey, I learned that financial recovery is as much psychological as practical. I had to confront the self-deception that had allowed me to ignore the growing crisis for years. Each time I transferred money to a credit card payment instead of buying something I deserved, I was rebuilding my relationship with financial reality. Building an emergency fund became my obsession during the later months of my debt payment plan. Starting with just $500, I gradually increased it to $2,000. Not the 3 to 6 months of expenses most experts recommend, but enough to handle minor emergencies without reaching for credit cards. That small buffer gave me the confidence to make better decisions even when unexpected expenses arose. My approach to financial recovery wasn't about perfect budgeting. It was about creating systems that worked even when my motivation faltered. I treated my recovery like a full-time job, with weekly check-ins on my progress and monthly strategy adjustments. The combination of drastic spending cuts, increased income through side hustles, and automated payment systems created momentum that carried me through the inevitable rough patches. The most transformative aspect wasn't found in spreadsheets or payment strategies. It was the radical transparency I adopted about my financial situation. After years of hiding my struggles and pretending to afford things I couldn't, openly acknowledging my limitations was terrifying at first, but that transparency became my superpower. It protected me from falling back into old patterns and attracted people who valued me for more than my spending capacity. Eventually, the day arrived, the final payment on my last credit card. I made it sitting alone in my shared apartment, tears streaming down my face as I hit the submit payment button. 3 years of sacrifice had led to this moment. My debt was gone, but what I'd gained was far more valuable. Financial self-awareness, authentic relationships, learning to say no, the new social reality head-on. While celebrating my debt-free status felt amazing, I quickly realized the battle to stay financially healthy required a new skill entirely. One that made my palms sweat more than checking my credit card statements ever did. Learning to say no became the most powerful financial tool in my arsenal, though it wasn't something any budget app or investment strategy could teach me. Even with my dramatically smaller but much more supportive friend circle, the invitations to spend money didn't stop coming. The group chat would light up with weekend getaway plans or tickets to the hottest new show in town. My stomach would knot up instantly. Not because I couldn't afford it, I was following my debt repayment plan religiously, but because saying no still felt like I was rejecting my friends rather than just the activity. Each decline felt like I was risking rejection all over again. It was the same fear that had driven me into debt in the first place. That moment of panic when you think, if I say no to this concert, will they stop inviting me altogether? The anxiety was real, and sometimes I'd find myself typing out excuses or vague responses before deleting them in frustration. What I needed wasn't just willpower, but an entirely new approach to navigating social situations. Through a lot of awkward conversations and some painful self-reflection, I developed what I now call my 3-part response system. When faced with an invitation beyond my budget, I would, first, honestly decline. I can't afford that right now. Second, suggest a budget-friendly alternative, but I'd love to host a game night at my apartment instead. And third, express genuine appreciation for being included. Thanks so much for thinking of me. The first few times I used this approach, my voice actually shook. I remember sitting at lunch with Jamie when she suggested we join a yoga studio that was running a special, $150 for the first month. Instead of my usual, let me check my schedule dodge, I took a deep breath and said, "That sounds amazing, but it's not in my budget right now. Would you want to try that free community yoga in the park on Saturdays instead? I really appreciate you thinking of me for this, though." What happened next completely shocked me. Jamie looked relieved and admitted she'd been stretching herself thin with fitness memberships and was actually looking for cheaper options herself. She'd only suggested it because she thought everyone else was comfortable spending that kind of money. We ended up becoming regular attendees at the park yoga sessions, which connected us with an entire community of people who valued experiences over expensive memberships. That pattern repeated itself more times than I can count. Friends who I assumed had unlimited budgets confessed they were also struggling, but had been afraid to be the first to suggest cheaper alternatives. It turns out many of us were performing the same expensive charade, all afraid to be the first to break character. As these conversations became easier, I created some personal rules to maintain my financial boundaries. The first was my no credit card social spending policy. If I couldn't pay for it in cash, I wouldn't do it, period. This single rule prevented the slippery, just this once exceptions that had gotten me into trouble before. My second rule was implementing a 72-hour consideration period for any invitation that would cost more than $50. This cooling off period allowed me to check my budget without the pressure of an immediate response. I'd simply say, "That sounds fun. Let me check my budget and get back to you in a couple days." This small buffer created space for rational financial decisions rather than emotional ones. My third rule was creating a monthly social budget in cash only. Each month, I'd withdraw a specific amount that was my guilt-free social spending money. When it was gone, and I had to get creative with free activities until the next month. Having this physical reminder of my limits made decisions much more concrete than the abstract numbers in my bank account ever had. What surprised me most during this time was how setting clear financial boundaries actually strengthened my relationships. When I couldn't afford something, I wouldn't disappear with vague excuses as I once did. Instead, I'd be direct. "I'd love to join, but I've already spent my entertainment budget for the month. Could we do something free this time, or rain check until next month?" This honesty created a foundation of trust that went far beyond money. My friend Tyler adopted my 72-hour rule and told me it saved him from at least 3 impulse purchases in the first month alone. Lisa and I started alternating hosting dinner at home instead of going out, discovering we both loved cooking but rarely made time for it. Mark and I found we actually preferred hiking and exploring free community events to the crowded bars we used to frequent. A turning point came when I was invited to a destination bachelor party that would have cost nearly $2,000. In the past, I would have immediately put it on credit cards, despite the financial suicide it represented. Instead, I called the groom directly and explained my situation, offering to organize a special local celebration when he returned. Not only was he understanding, but he later confided that 3 other friends had gone into debt to attend because they were too embarrassed to admit they couldn't afford it. According to the research, I wasn't alone in wanting more financial openness. About 65% of young adults want to discuss money matters more openly, which makes sense when you consider how much financial stress we're all under. Once I started being honest about my limitations, I found myself part of that growing movement toward financial transparency. Another fascinating insight from research is that 58% of 18 to 35-year-olds are now integrating financial management into their overall wellness routines. I could relate to this shift completely. Saying no when necessary and being honest about my financial boundaries became as important to my mental health as exercise and healthy eating. The constant background anxiety of stretching beyond my means had disappeared, replaced with the security of knowing exactly where I stood financially. The experts were right about creating a 3-part response system too. By declining honestly, suggesting alternatives, and expressing appreciation, I managed to preserve relationships while staying true to my financial goals. This framework worked because it addressed both the practical need to save money and the emotional need to maintain connections. The comparison between my before and after social lives was stark. Before, I was constantly calculating during social events, mentally adding up the bill, wondering how much my portion would be, worrying about how I'd pay for it. Conversations were half attended because part of my brain was always doing financial gymnastics. After embracing financial honesty, I was fully present. I could engage in conversations without the mental math running in the background. I could suggest activities without shame. I could enjoy the moment without worry about the bill at the end. One of the most valuable lessons I learned was that alternatives often ended up being more meaningful than the expensive original plans. When Alex suggested an upscale brunch that would have cost at least $60, I countered with hosting a potluck brunch at my place, where everyone brought a dish. Not only did it save all of us money, but it became a monthly tradition that everyone looked forward to more than restaurant outings. The conversations were deeper, the food was more diverse, and the connections more authentic without the distractions of a public setting. The unexpected benefits of financial honesty. Those monthly potluck brunches revealed something I never expected. Financial honesty wasn't just saving my bank account, it was completely upgrading my mental health and relationships in ways I couldn't have imagined. When I first started being transparent about my money situation, I worried I'd lose everything that mattered. 3 years later, I can confidently say that financial honesty delivered a life with deeper connections, better sleep, and an authentic sense of self that no credit card purchase could ever provide. Let me be clear, this transformation wasn't easy. There were countless moments when I was tempted to slip back into old habits. Like when my significantly reduced friend circle planned a weekend getaway, and I had to be the one saying, "That's not in my budget right now." Or when a new potential friend suggested a restaurant where the appetizers cost more than I budgeted for an entire meal. The pull to just say yes and figure it out later was strong. But something incredible happened when I consistently chose honesty over pretending. My entire well-being transformed. The first major benefit I noticed was how my anxiety levels plummeted. Before my financial confession, I lived in a constant state of low-grade panic. Every notification on my phone could be a bank alert. Every friendly invitation came with a side of stress. Financial transparency eliminated that ambient anxiety almost immediately. My mental well-being improved dramatically once I stopped hiding my financial reality. According to research, this isn't unusual. People who practice financial honesty experience significantly reduced anxiety and stress related to money management. The constant cognitive load of maintaining a financial facade is exhausting, and releasing that burden creates mental space for actual joy and presence. Sleep was the next thing to improve. Remember those 3 a.m. panic sessions staring at the ceiling, mentally calculating which bill I could pay late? They disappeared. Not because my financial situation magically fixed itself overnight, but because I was no longer living in fear of being found out. The shame I carried about my financial situation had been keeping me awake, not just the actual numbers. Once I started being honest with others, I could finally be honest with myself, even in those vulnerable midnight moments. This improved sleep wasn't just making me less cranky, it fundamentally changed how I approached each day. With proper rest, I could think more clearly about my finances and make better decisions. This created a positive cycle. Better decisions led to improved financial situation, which led to less stress and better sleep, which led to even better decisions. The relationships in my life underwent a remarkable transformation too. Yes, I lost some people along the way, but the friendships that remained evolved into something far more meaningful than I ever had before. When financial pretense was removed, our conversations deepened beyond surface-level topics. We started discussing our dreams, fears, and values, things that actually matter. Research confirms this experience, showing that financial honesty leads to deeper, more authentic relationships. When we share our financial struggles, it fosters a genuine sense of community and support. My friends and I began supporting each other's financial goals rather than unknowingly sabotaging them. We celebrated budget victories together and strategized through challenges. These connections became a crucial part of my emotional health in a way that our previous restaurant-hopping friendship never could. One unexpected benefit was how financial honesty impacted my career trajectory. Before, I was taking any opportunity that promised a higher salary, regardless of whether it aligned with my skills or interests. I was desperate for money to maintain my facade. Once I embraced financial transparency, something shifted in my professional mindset. I stopped approaching job interviews with desperation and started evaluating opportunities based on how they aligned with my actual values and goals. This confidence came through in interviews, and I found myself landing roles that were better fits for my skills. Studies support this experience, showing that individuals who practice financial transparency tend to have better career outcomes. They're more likely to negotiate salaries and seek promotions because they feel empowered by their financial knowledge and honesty. For me, this translated into finding work I genuinely enjoyed, rather than just chasing the biggest paycheck. I negotiated for benefits that actually improved my quality of life, like flexible hours and professional development opportunities, instead of just focusing on the salary number. This alignment between my work and my values created a sense of purpose that no inflated paycheck could provide. Dating was another area where financial honesty created unexpected benefits. In the past, I'd avoid money conversations with potential partners, sometimes spending beyond my means to impress them. This inevitably created tension later when financial realities surfaced. After my financial awakening, I started discussing money values early in relationships. This approach filtered out incompatible partners much faster. Some people were uncomfortable with my direct approach to money conversations, but those weren't people I could build a future with anyway. The partners who appreciated my transparency shared similar values about financial honesty, creating a foundation of trust from the beginning. I discovered that being upfront about finances actually made me more attractive to the right kind of people, those who valued authenticity over appearances. Research indicates this type of alignment around money values is crucial for relationship satisfaction and longevity. By leading with financial honesty, I was effectively pre-screening for compatibility in an area that frequently causes relationship conflict. Perhaps the most significant benefit was the profound shift in how I view myself. Before, my self-worth was tied to external appearances, the restaurants I could afford, the clothes I wore, the trips I took. Financial honesty forced me to develop a sense of self-worth based on my character and values rather than my purchasing power. This is consistent with research showing that financial honesty can lead to a greater sense of self-respect and personal integrity. I started feeling more in control of my life and finances when I embraced transparency, which led to improved decision-making across all areas of my life. The self-respect I gained wasn't tied to my bank balance, but to my commitment to living authentically. Financial honesty also helped me align my spending with my actual values rather than perceived social expectations. When I stopped trying to impress others, I could direct my limited resources toward things that truly mattered to me. Research confirms that individuals who align their spending with their values report higher levels of life satisfaction and reduced financial anxiety. For example, I realized I genuinely valued experiences in nature over expensive restaurant meals. Once I stopped forcing myself into social situations that required spending beyond my means, I could invest in quality hiking gear that I still use years later. This shift toward value-aligned spending created genuine joy that no impulse purchase ever did. Another unexpected benefit was improved financial literacy. When I stopped hiding from my financial reality, I became curious about how to improve it. I started seeking out information and education on managing money effectively. This proactive approach to financial education is common among people who practice financial transparency. When we're not hiding from our situation, we're more motivated to improve it. I began to understand concepts like compound interest, investment strategies, and retirement planning. These topics had seemed overwhelming before, but with my newfound commitment to financial honesty, I approached them with curiosity rather than fear. This education further empowered me to make better financial decisions, creating yet another positive cycle. The journey wasn't linear or perfect. There were setbacks along the way. Moments when I slipped into old habits or felt the sting of social exclusion. What kept me committed to financial honesty was experiencing these tangible benefits in my daily life. Each good night's sleep, each authentic conversation, each value-aligned purchase reinforced that I was on the right path. Are you living a financial lie? How to spot the warning signs. Those value-aligned purchases I mentioned? For years, I thought I was making them while secretly living a financial lie. Have you ever checked your bank balance in private immediately before saying, "Sure, I can afford that," to friends? That seemingly innocent habit was my first step down a slippery slope of financial self-deception that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. The thing about financial dishonesty is that it rarely feels like a problem while you're in it. I never woke up thinking, today I'm going to lie about my finances. Instead, it was a series of small moments where choosing comfort over truth became my default setting. What makes these warning signs particularly dangerous is how our society essentially endorses them. We're bombarded with messages telling us to treat ourselves and live our best lives without much discussion about the actual numbers behind those aspirational phrases. Let me walk you through 5 warning signs I wish someone had pointed out to me years ago. These red flags were waving frantically in my face, but I had become so skilled at ignoring them that they might as well have been invisible. Warning sign number 1, the private banking ritual. Do you find yourself habitually checking your bank balance in complete privacy, maybe in a bathroom stall or under your desk, right before confirming plans with friends? I developed an almost ceremonial approach to this. I'd excuse myself, lock myself in a bathroom stall, check my balance, wince, and then return to the conversation with a bright smile and enthusiastic agreement to whatever expensive plan was being discussed. The real issue isn't the act of checking your balance. That's actually responsible. It's the secretive nature combined with the immediate social mask you put on afterward. If you can't openly discuss your financial limitations with the people you're about to spend money with, you're living in a dangerous disconnection between your financial reality and your social persona. Warning sign number 2, the credit card rotation system. One particularly telling sign of financial self-deception is when you develop sophisticated systems to manage your growing debt. For me, this manifested as having different credit cards for different friend groups. My work friends' dinners went on the blue card. My college friends' weekend trips went on the black card. Family obligations went on the old backup card I kept just for emergencies. This distributed debt approach creates an illusion of manageability. Each individual card might not seem that bad on its own, but altogether, the total becomes something you actively avoid calculating. It's like having multiple leaks in a boat and convincing yourself that because each leak is small, the boat isn't actually sinking. If you're sorting friends by credit cards or juggling payment due dates based on social calendars, you're not managing your money. You're managing the appearance of having money. Warning sign number 3, the future me fantasy. How often do you make purchase decisions with the phrase, "I'll figure it out later," playing in your head? This was my constant companion through years of financial self-sabotage. Every time I agreed to an expensive dinner or weekend getaway, I'd mentally delegate the problem to future me. That mythical, more financially stable version of myself who would surely have everything under control by the time the credit card bill arrived. This procrastination isn't just about putting off payment. It reflects a fundamental confirmation bias in how we approach our finances. Studies show that many of us actively seek information that supports our existing beliefs about our financial situation, leading to distorted perceptions and increasingly poor decisions. If you're constantly deferring financial worry to some future version of yourself, you're not just procrastinating. You're actively engaging in a form of financial self-deception that compounds with every swipe of your card. Warning sign number 4, the cancellation relief syndrome. Here's a particularly revealing sign, feeling a confusing mix of disappointment and relief when plans get canceled. The disappointment is social. You wanted to see your friends, but that undercurrent of relief? That's your financial reality breaking through the surface of your social pretense. I remember checking my phone one morning to find that a weekend trip had been canceled because someone else had a family emergency. My first thought wasn't concern for my friend. It was relief that I wouldn't have to put another $600 on my credit card while pretending I was totally fine with the expense. That momentary relief was immediately followed by shame. Shame that I was secretly glad about a friend's misfortune, and deeper shame that I couldn't simply be honest about my financial limitations in the first place. If canceled plans bring a wave of financial relief washing over your social disappointment, you're caught in the undertow of financial dishonesty. This emotional contradiction is a glaring sign that your spending doesn't align with your actual financial situation. Warning sign number 5. The emotional spending spiral. One warning sign that took me years to recognize was my pattern of doom spending, using purchases as emotional regulation when I was already stressed about money. It sounds completely irrational because it is. Feeling anxious about debt, then spending more money to temporarily relieve that anxiety, creating more debt and more anxiety in an endless cycle. This isn't just poor financial management, it's a psychological indicator of financial dishonesty with yourself. When you're using spending to cope with the stress caused by spending, you've entered a particularly destructive feedback loop. I found myself buying new clothes for events with the same friends whose expensive outings had contributed to my debt in the first place. Each purchase was a band-aid on the bleeding wound of my financial reality. Beyond these specific warning signs, there are broader patterns to watch for. Many of us overestimate our financial knowledge while simultaneously underestimating the importance of budgeting and saving. This dangerous combination creates a perfect storm for financial self-deception. We think we know more than we do, so we don't seek help, and we don't prioritize the fundamental practices that could actually improve our situation. The psychological components are just as important as the financial ones. If you notice feelings of shame and secrecy surrounding your financial situation, that's a crucial red flag. These emotions don't just make you feel bad, they actively prevent you from seeking help or making necessary changes. They're the emotional guardrails keeping you trapped on the road to financial disaster. So here I am, standing on the other side of what felt like an impossible mountain. My $35,000 debt is gone, but what I've gained is worth infinitely more. The research is clear. Financial transparency creates a ripple effect that transforms your entire life. When I finally stopped hiding my money struggles, my anxiety levels plummeted almost overnight. Here's what financial honesty really gave me: the ability to sleep through the night without panic, relationships built on authenticity rather than appearances, and a profound sense of self-worth that isn't tied to my spending power. Studies confirm that people who practice financial transparency experience dramatically improved mental health and life satisfaction. The choice is yours now. You can keep paying the emotional tax of financial pretending, or build a life where both your relationships and your bank account thrive. The most expensive purchase you'll ever make isn't a house or a car. It's buying into the lie that your value comes from what you spend. Your true friends will value your presence, not your presence. And that reality, it's absolutely priceless.